Hey, so how's it going, guys? This is Ryo Murata, photographer based in Tokyo. It is still the raining season again, and it's really crappy. Waiting for the sun to shine, hopefully in the near future. But random video, I thought sort of like, why not sort of share my top 5 tips for shooting 35mm film? I still consider myself as a beginner, and obviously for people who are super like professional, if you're in that professional league in film photography, I highly advise not to watch this video because this is going to be really boring stuff. So yeah, please like skip this video. But I mean, you might find something interesting along the way. So number one is an obvious one for a lot of people, but please do not purchase the 27 exposure film stock for the 35mm period, because long story short, if you're actually like starting out and if you go to a local like camera store, you find basically two like boxes of the exact same brand Fujifilm, let's say Fujifilm Superia 400, but they actually sell a 27 exposure roll and a 36 exposure roll. And probably if you're like real experienced, the majority of you guys will just go ahead and purchase a 36 exposure roll. But if you're actually starting out, what comes to mind is the price. And you guys know that the 27 exposure roll of 35mm film is actually more cheaper than the 36 like exposure film, because there's like less like films on that roll. But when you actually take into account of getting it processed and the long-term like cost of getting your 35mm like films being processed, it's actually much cheaper to like sort of like manage a 36 exposure like film, because due to the fact that you can get more shots on the exact same roll, which means that it actually shaves away your time when you start like trying to like organize your like films negatives in a folder. And at the same time, it basically sort of decreases the amount of time you have to like swap one film after you finish shooting and swapping in another one. And it's interesting because typically speaking, if you shoot with a 35mm film, if you're starting out, you will burn one roll of film pretty fast. And 27 in most cases is not ideal, and 36 actually gets the job done in most cases. And for me, I don't and I'm sort of like an exception, because you guys know I shoot with a medium format camera, and medium format camera tends to get you like less shots, like 10 shots, 8 shots, 12 shots, 15 shots, depending on what format you're shooting. So I'm used to that. So 36 exposure for me is sort of like hell. It's like I don't want to shoot 36. So that's like one exception. If you're like someone like me who never shoots that many shots, 27 like exposure films might be the sort of like better alternative. So that's number one. Number two would be expensive cameras and lens combo is not necessarily the correct answer. And let's dig in deeper. So basically, I came from digital. So what's important with digital photography is that the camera and lens is the most important factor when getting that great image quality, because the sensor within that camera which resolute the image, and along with that, in order to sort of like manage those image quality, you need a really nice lens built optically in modern standard. So those are the most important factors when shooting digital. But when you hop over to film, I realized later that the camera and lens combo is not the most important factor when shooting photos. And what's the most important factor is the film stock that you're using. And this actually depends on which film stock you use, the consumer grade versus the I call the professional grade. And there's a lot of YouTubers who already did those types of videos, so I'm not going to be talking in depth about that. But what's great about film photography is that you really don't need a super expensive camera to like shoot really nice images, honestly. And in my previous, like I think my first video I shot with a Nikon FM10, which broke down on me, unfortunately. But that camera's like I purchased it for $40-50. And right now I shoot with a Nikon F3, and I can't tell that much of a quality difference from shooting with those two types of cameras. Like one's expensive, Nikon F3 is expensive camera, Nikon FM10 is a crappy old so-so camera, but great entry level camera. But I mean, the camera price, I mean, it does not matter. What matters the most is the film stock that you're using. And in most cases, like if you use the professional grade films, in most cases that would offer great results. Number 3 is carry more films and varieties than you can shoot on that day. What does that mean? It just means like that. It just means that basically there are times when you're like basically shooting through the whole day and you find something particularly interesting, and these things happen spontaneously and you can't like sort of like predict what's gonna happen in the future. So when those times happen, what happens is you basically burn through a lot of rolls, and when you burn a lot of rolls, you're basically shooting more than like the stock amount of films that you brought along. So you basically don't have any like backup reserve. And I realized this the hard way, because it's like really important to have extra like films at your disposal, because what happens is when you burn through all your rolls and you don't have like nothing to shoot with, in most cases back in like 10-20 years ago, there was those like little stalls, where they like sell like film, instant cameras, film stocks. But right now, 2021, those stalls don't sell any like films as of now, so you're kind of screwed. But it's like important to have like sort of like a backup like film along the way. If you're going on a trip, on a vacation like far away from like any like remote area, it's like important to like have like film at your disposal. And it's like important, and on top of that, I think it's like really important to sort of like have a variety of film stocks. So ISO 100, ISO 400, ISO 800, because during that shoot, you never know when the weather is gonna turn on you. And it was like sunny all day long, but in the afternoon it becomes like partly cloudy, and shooting with a 100 ISO film on a cloudy day is irritating in my eyes, and I experienced it the hard way here. And it's like, if you have like an ISO 400 film, you can basically swap that out after you finish shooting, and you'll be okay during that shoot. So that's number 3, like carry more films and films varieties than you can shoot on that specific day. Number 4 is a really minor one for me, but it's a must, is like always wear a sort of like a lens hood on your film camera, film lens itself. I mean, if you come from the digital side, I mean, having a lens hood is like, I might be blunt to and say this directly to those. I'm gonna piss off a lot of people, but I think you don't need a lens hood on a digital camera, digital like SLR. The reason why is modern lens technology has improved so much that the coating it's on those like, what was it, like Nikon's nano crystal coatings, Canon's L lenses, Sony's, I forgot what coating they use, but like these coatings actually improved dramatically over the past like decade or so, that it's almost impossible to get flares, glares, ghosting on those like modern lenses on a digital camera. But because we're talking about film, this is not the case. The reason why is that if you don't have a sort of like a lens hood onto your lens itself, what happens is in most cases, if you're like shooting during this really summer like sunny day, like in most cases you will get a really low contrast image. And the reason why, because is that the sun is basically interfering with the lens element, and basically you're getting sort of like a low contrast, low sort of like, it's like an unsharpened image, and it looks really blurry kind of. So by adding that sort of like lens hood, it kind of blocks part of the light leaking into the lens. And then what happens is you get sort of like a little bit of a sharper image. For some people you can't realize it, but in my eyes, I mean, film, like, you once you get your film's negatives back, you can't post process it. I mean, you could add a sharpening, but it looks really artificial. So I tried to get everything perfect within camera when shooting film. So having a lens hood attached to a lens is really important. So that's why I chose it for number 4. And for some people, I mean, there's people who don't actually use a lens hood, and they just like the looks of the images that look really dreamy look, one of those types of photos. I think those types of people don't use a lens hood, and I mean, it's personal preference, but in my case, I tend to have a lens hood on my lens at all times when shooting with a 35mm film camera. And I forgot to mention another big bonus for having a lens like hood on a lens itself is that there are those cases, 0.001% cases where you will drop your camera, and if it like falls face down, it's gonna damage your lens. So what the lens hood does is it basically acts as a like sort of like a suspension, and it kind of, the lens hood will break, but it won't break your lens in most cases. So that's another thing to mention. So that's number 4, is having a lens hood at all times. 5 is, instead of like a tip, it's more like an item basically, and it's not a must, but it's like worth owning, and it's a light meter. And I think I talked it in my best purchases of 2020 last year, if I'm right, and it's a Psychonic light meter L3008. But depending on what kind of camera you use, if you use like a point and shoot, it doesn't have a light meter installed, so you really, it basically like adjust according to plan kind of, so you really don't have to think about it when you're shooting with a point and shoot. It's automatic, and it gives you the correct exposure in most cases. But if you shoot with an SLR, you have like 3 cases. You have case number 1 where the camera does not come with a light meter, and case number 2 is it does come with a light meter and you don't need a light meter, like a Nikon F3, let's say. And number 3 is like the camera has a light meter, but in most cases that light meter's broken. That's my Mamiya 645. So the prism viewfinder of my Mamiya 645, there is a light meter in there, but it's like broken, so I can't use it. So that's why I use a light meter. But the reason why it's sort of like important to have a light meter is that it kind of decreases the amount of failure shots. So if you have less like failing shots means getting a super underexposed shot, or sort of like, on the other hand, a super overexposed shot. I consider those two as a sort of like a failure shot. So it's important to sort of like understand like how much light is sort of like entering your camera, so you can basically choose the right setting on your film camera. And by having a light meter, it gives you that precise control, the precise, like you can imagine it within yourself that, okay, the setting is like, the optimal setting would be like 1/125th of a second, f8 at ISO 100 on a really sunny day, maybe partly cloudy. And there's those people out there who can sort of like state like precise, like what you call the setting, the exposure as a light meter, but those people might fail in the long run, because you can't like trust yourself. The sun is on the left side, it is going down at a 30-degree angle, so my shutter speed is like 1/125th of a second, f8, ISO 100. That's perfect. You're wrong, stupid, it's f11. So that's why I use sort of like a little machine to sort of like decipher how much light's entering into my camera. And sometimes it might be light that's reflecting from a surface, so I can't predict that. So it's important to have a light meter. So that's number 5. Yeah. But there is actually a good news for you guys who don't have a light meter. There is an app called Light Meter. If you go from Google Play Store, iOS Play Store, or something like that, there is an application for a light meter app, and these are actually really good. Not like 100% perfect, but they actually get like 70-80% of the job done. So having this around, sort of in my case, it becomes sort of like a backup, sort of like light meter if my Psychonic craps on me. So if it like fails, I use the like meter app, but it actually works pretty well in most cases. And I use a really cheap smartphone. I use like $100 smartphone right now as of 2021. So this light meter app is a great, like, not purchase, but it's like a free purchase, so it's free. Just download it, and you might use it in like near future maybe. So it's like one of the things that I wanted to point out to you guys. So that's basically my top 5 tips that I found when like shooting with 35mm film. Obviously there should be like tens, hundreds, thousands of tips that you guys probably have, something that you guys like realize along the way when shooting 35mm film, and I would love to see your like top 5 tips in the comments below, because sharing knowledge is power, and the more like knowledge we have, it will benefit the society as a whole. So hope you guys enjoy this video. If you have any questions regarding my top 5 tips, I mean, you could call that's BS, Rio. I mean, that could happen, you know. There's a lot of professional people watching my videos, and I don't call myself a super professional film photographer shooting 35mm. I'm still a noob. I'm basically a beginner, so hope I help some people along the way. And yeah, hope you guys like this video. Please comment, and yeah, we'll see you next time. See ya.